this A Journey of Self-Discovery is a kind of a title that was, I guess, Bruno, you kind of plucked from somewhere, and I kind of went with that. I liked it. I was kind of like, we talked about what we might talk about, and it made me think about what we kind of come across at Circle, what kind of conversations we have with clients, and how they end up kind of talking about where they are and where they want to be. And quite often there are things that we kind of think, well, we can help as much as we can, but sometimes it's nice to say, go away and have a little think about that. And that's something we kind of thought about a lot more recently, what you can do to kind of help yourself, get one step ahead of the conversation. So that's what we're going to kind of talk about today. So I'm the development manager at Circle Interactive. My part of my role is to ensure that vision for a client's kind of new system's been captured and scrutinized before it's translated into something plausible for the development team to start working on. So like I said, what we're going to talk about briefly today is how we can kickstart that process of discovering what it is you're looking for within your team before you maybe call on the experts to start building something. And some of the things we'll be talking about today and covering actually, I think, will help with many problems essentially within an organization, and not necessarily, we're talking from a CiviCRM implementation idea here, but reuse these thoughts and, you can twist them to get to where you need to be and solve any sort of situation or any changes coming up. So, so kind of have a look at that. So, the first kind of thing I was thinking about why it's kind of important that we think about this initial discovery phase first. So this is how I kind of wanted to summarize and start with. So in my experiences, there's no better way to save thousands in development costs than by having that clear vision. So it's tempting to kind of bring out the classic image of, a few of you would have seen it, of the kind of tire swing analogy of what a customer explained versus what they actually got and what they really wanted. And there's something kind of nice and valid in there, but it kind of frustrates me seeing that because it kind of puts people off the idea of starting a project because it feels like it will never go right. And I think it misses the point that, of course, things are going to be ironed out along the way. Various paths are going to be explored, and that's healthy. And, we should be embracing that. So I want to focus on that vision part of the statement here and why that should be your main focus before anything even becomes a project. But, there's a little something we can learn from how a project kind of works, especially kind of how we operate at Circle. So broadly thinking, during our kind of development and design processes, and as many organizations will do the same, there's two kind of zones. There's the problem space and then your solution space. And it seems obvious, when you see that there, but starting off with that clear in your mind, especially here, allows us to kind of think about the golden rule of software development, and any developers in the call will be seeing this one from me quite a lot, is the idea that we should be thinking of requirements before we say the solutions. So before we begin to solve a problem, we need to understand it correctly first. So if we start focusing on generating an answer to a question you haven't really asked yourself yet, or a problem you haven't realized you've got, the inevitable will happen if you start developing on that and coming up with solutions. You're just dragging your current problems into your new solutions with you. And often people make the first step of generating a kind of nice list of specific requirements to hand over. And these are often generated with the limited thinking of what you've got, the current kind of problem and the current system restrictions in mind. So you kind of think about, the analogy of moving a house and taking all the, the junk with you is what kind of comes to mind there. So anyway, so for this conversation, we're going to zoom into that problem space idea and just worry about that bit and completely forget about solutions. So we won't really talk about CiviCRM in particular here, but you can see how we can twist it to help think about implementing something new, a new CRM like CiviCRM. So what we're going to do is see where the problems really are and question why we do the things we do. So the problem space itself has kind of three stages, just to kind of set the scene here. So there's a collect phase, an observe phase, and a define or kind of choose phase. And the idea of the collection phase is to learn more about the business and the needs of your stakeholders, discover what tasks get completed and where they need to be, asking yourselves why we're here, what's what you're doing right and wrong. And then the observe phase is about establishing common understanding about your experiences. So seeing what actions happen before, during, after, and discussing the opportunities for improvement, and maybe even identifying those moments of misery. So where things are kind of causing real problems for people as you kind of watch them work. And then the define bit is when you kind of narrow that down and say, right, okay, we have this list of things, we can see what's happening, and then we want to kind of narrow it down and focus on prioritizing and weighing up the kind of findings and focus on what we're really going to look at in that detail and move on from there. So sounds good so far. So where do you start? There's a wealth of tools and workshops to conduct during that phase, and so I was thinking that time is precious. Everyone's kind of busy. Engaging with consultants too early can potentially be costly. So here's the kind of the thoughts that I was kind of gathering for collecting, observing, defining those kind of phases of the problem statement to say, actually, you can be one step ahead in generating your vision. So let me move on to the first one. The first idea is this discovery of your problems using a sailboat. So the idea here is to be more aware of the concerns and issues you're facing and your stakeholders, and potentially see where the problems really are. So this is kind of asking yourself why you're here and where you're going, and what's potentially slowing you down and from reaching your mission, and what's driving you forward and what's keeping you on track. So this one's really simple. It's a favorite of mine. Anyone who's kind of worked with me before would have done some version of it. And it takes a short amount of time, and at the end you'll be kind of more aware of those concerns, like I said. So the tools that you can use here is just a whiteboard, face to face if you're kind of at that point now or moving towards that point, with real whiteboard and post-its. There's a lot of online whiteboard options now. They've obviously rocketed. We personally use Miro here, but there's a few others like Mural, which are all fine and have free accounts that you can use. What's really useful here is the timer edition, because we'll get to that in a second. Having a deadline to something really does help people. So the first step is to draw a sailboat. No kind of art experience required here. So the sail on the top, and an anchor below the waterline, and you probably guessed where kind of my love of analogies is going with this one. So the first step you're going to be looking at is what's moving you forward. Now you're going to get each member of your team, and you'll have a post-it note, or you'll kind of have them on your virtual board to add to, and you're going to ask them to write 3 things that they feel are moving the team forward when it comes to the challenge that you're kind of talking about and the problem you're solving. So it could be, when it comes to working with a CRM, what's moving us forward, what are the positive things that are happening, and then time that and say you've got 3 minutes to go through that. They'll be putting some simple statements up, sticking them on the top and what's moving us forward. Once that time's up, you'll move on to the next phase, which is what's holding us back. So ideally you could be doing this anonymously, so people can be more honest about their thoughts. And it's the same kind of framed question where, when it comes to using CRM, what's holding you back and what's hurting us and what's slowing us down. You can have more time for this one, so say 8 minutes or so, for everyone to stick their notes onto the bottom part of the sailboat. And there should be no discussion here. That's the key kind of point of this, is that everyone's just kind of putting everything out there and right onto the board there. You'll have something kind of looking like this at the end. So here's your kind of visual overview of the challenges that the team's experiencing, as well as the positives and things that are going. We did a similar thing in the dev team recently. It's kind of a bit tricky to see, but it gives you an idea of just, you don't have to do anything too complicated here. It's just a sense of, here's the things that we're kind of talking about, the problem we're trying to resolve, which in this case here, we're talking about our testing processes. So everyone was just kind of putting their opinions on there, and it doesn't matter, where you are in the organization, what your kind of, how long you've been here, your role or your seniority. It's everyone kind of putting those conversations into kind of ignite conversation later on and really get a sense of where everyone is. A really good phase after that is to take those challenges from the bottom and the issues, and start to categorize them, remove the duplicates, just kind of keeping it simple. And you'll spot those kind of categories as you go along. So there might be something obvious around, membership sign up or something like that, that's really obvious, or kind of, paperwork or manual processes. Start to put them together into categories. And essentially that's it. That's where you've kind of got to. That short amount of time, could be less than half an hour, without hours of debate, no email exchanges, no loud voices overruling or kind of showing rank. You've collected, you've categorized the real problems that face the team. And from a software point of view, and for us, that's really important, because that then lets us see, okay, where are the real problems within your organization, without having to interview every expert or speak to everyone and see who's doing what and why. That's a really nice quick win, that the information from that can really guide us and say, hey, you've got a lot of things here that we could look at, and that can motivate us of where our first step can be in implementing the system, and where the real problems are. So potentially there's quite a lot of information that you'll get. So I'm going to drop a quick tip in here for making a decision on what to focus on next within that, because there could be a lot of things in that list. So here's something that I think is quite useful to kind of stop the endless loop of decision making that we tend to find ourselves in. So we talk about things too much, and someone suggests something else, and then they suggest something else, and we talk about it some more, and you tend to never really get to the end of the problem. So what I think is sensible here is something called dot voting. So we took those problems from what we mentioned about before, and we generated some other thoughts in the dev team about things we could look at. And the idea of the dot voting thing was just to say, you gather all your kind of your ideas or your things that you're talking about, you discuss what's been talked about very briefly, and then very simply you get 3 votes per person, and they can be small kind of post-it dots in the real world. And for example, on this is using Miro that we have here, that they actually have an inbuilt system to allow you to kickstart those things. You can set a timer for a few minutes and then get everyone voting, and that's a really useful way then to see where the weighting is of everyone's opinions. And they can be anonymous, obviously, so people are just saying, this is where I have a problem, this is, I agree with this one. It's kind of like the equivalent of like a thumbs up on social media. So within a few minutes, without much discussion, a decision's been made, and you can see there, okay, that's the most votes, that's the one that we're going to look at, and that's the thing we need to worry about the most. Really useful, really helps get kind of everyone in line and aligned with the same kind of thinking. Okay, so on to my next workshop to try out. This is the user story workshop. A few of you probably would have seen something like this already, but it's worth just going over very quickly about why we do this and why it's important. So the user story workshop is good because it goes through the collecting, the observing, and the defining stages all through one wash, really, and one kind of pass before you can move on to the next stage. So it gives you a quick win of all those things in one kind of small session. So it's going to tick many of the boxes and hopefully give you a kind of big step closer. It's also important for project management in Agile, because it's key to understanding the stakeholders, the services, the actions, and what tasks people need to perform when interacting with this kind of proposed system. The starting point is something called user stories. So they're small descriptions of tasks that a certain user will be able to perform. They're normally devoid of technical jargon and, in understandable layman's terms, really. Here's a kind of basic anatomy of a user story. So as a user role, I should be able to perform some action so that some benefit I can achieve. For example, as an office administrator, I should be able to edit a contact record so that our data remains accurate. So to start off, you want to think about who's interacting with your system, gather those stakeholders, get them kind of listed down. Who are the people who are, involved? Who's kind of interacting, like I said, with the proposed system, the new system, the current system. Really useful to go through that phase. And then the people within those roles that you've gathered, you should be inviting them to think of what actions they would like to perform on the system and write them down using that user story template we just mentioned. It's a really useful guide, the template, to outline the task simply and without over explaining in the jargon, like I said. But people do tend to get a bit bored writing. It feels a bit kind of forcing. You know, I should, you know, as a so-and-so, I should be able to. So don't feel too stressed about it being perfect. You don't have to worry about following it exactly. It's just a good idea of showing that we're looking for breadth and, you know, not depth of information here, just a wide range of an idea of what tasks are happening. So we're gathering everything and all that we know that happens, and we're asking the individuals and the stakeholders, the experts, we're asking them directly. And that's really important too, because quite often you can ask, you know, the person in charge, the director or CEO, what processes happen, and they might not always be aware of those things that go on behind the scenes. So by asking directly, that saves a lot of effort from our point of view when, you know, a project comes to us, that we can say we understand what things are being performed by what people, and this gives that kind of one format, one easy way to kind of manage that. So how you're going to capture that and how you're going to store that and how you're going to send that round is important. And our advice here is Trello. So some people would be using Trello. If you're not aware of it, you need to use Trello because it's very useful. It's a kind of task system, and it gives you a way to prioritize things nicely, visualize and share with everyone, especially in a remote environment now. It's absolutely perfect. You can mimic the behavior in whiteboards and post-its and virtual whiteboards, but this has worked well for us and it's kind of simple to go through. So let's just have a kind of quick look at an example of how you can set that up. So in the kind of lists and the kind of columns here, you're seeing at the top, you've got your stakeholders, the people we define using the system. And then you can get those to add cards, which is the kind of the rows below them, to say, this is what I need to be able to do, and this is what I do. And that's their user stories, essentially. So you're populating that with all that information, which is great. And then you can move those cards around, you can set the priorities, and then, you know, this to a project manager is, you know, lots of work already done. The idea, and, you know, you've put some effort and energy into finding this out. You can start to kind of question some of these things. You kind of say, oh, I've noticed, you know, as an internal kind of conversation, you know, why do you need to do that? Why is it that you're, you know, doing this thing? I thought so-and-so did that. And then you can really see where those conversations can happen before, you know, on someone else's time, which could be expensive. So again, it's just putting it all out on the table, having a conversation internally and saying, right, this is good, this is wrong, have a think about it. And then prioritizing within that gives you a sense of where we can take this project and how we can work on the things that really matter. So the combination of where the problems are, what tasks are being performed and why, gives us a really good idea of where things are going. So I'm going to jump into my last kind of thought quickly. And this is about mapping the user journey. It's only a short, quick one, but it's something that's worth thinking about. And it's a nice kind of visual way of allowing you to see the steps a user takes to get to their objective, and then potentially within that where problems and confusion reign. So there's something to kind of think about. It's very simple. All you need to do is list stakeholders on the left. So normally it's a good idea just to think about one small task. So for example, a prospective member, and their goal is to become a member and sign up. And then you want to include, you know, the admin teams that may be involved, the kind of staff, the membership team, and how they interact during that phase. And then you want to kind of write the desired outcome on the right-hand side. So a member becomes a member. And then you're just fitting in the gaps between about the journey, how they go, how they interact, how they go between the system. We did a similar thing recently, looking at our ticketing workflow. And why that's useful is, you know, you can see where things, when you're asking people what happens and what do you do here, what does the, you know, what person's responsible for these things. When you fill in these gaps, you kind of start to understand essentially where things are too busy or where there's some confusion. So someone might say, well, actually, that's not what happens here, or I don't know, we did that, or I don't always do that. And that's a, you know, again, a really clear way for us to understand and, you know, and support this roadmap with the kind of problems you've lined up before, and say, oh, okay, yeah, the problems are in this area here, or this relates to those categories you mentioned before. And again, you've got a really kind of firm idea then of where problems lie, and what it is you need to focus on first as a priority, as opposed to trying to solve everything in one go and blowing budget and running out of time and overwhelming potentially a project. So those are my kind of main tips there. In summary, the key thing to understanding where the problems are was that Sailboat example. Very simple, just gets people thinking and talking without too much debate and kind of fallouts. And it's really good because then having those conversations internally mean you're not doing it on someone else's time and involving other people and other organizations. And it's a nice way to kind of get through that kind of conversation. The user stories is a great way to discover, the tasks that your team are doing. And again, a good kind of conversation starter to say, hey, I didn't realize you're doing that. I didn't even know that was part of our system. Why does that need to be part of this CRM build? And, again, it triggers that thought, makes you think about it, gets it through the wash before it gets turned into a project. And then the mapping and understanding of your user journeys, really useful for a development team to see that, to understand it, because we can see where you are at the moment, understand what you're doing, and then we can suggest a kind of how it should be or how we would like to be as a proposed journey for the user, and show the difference in, normally the reducing the amount of manual operations or processes or handing of data from one thing to the other. And then again, finally, the last little useful tool was encourage that efficient decision making by using voting. Put a time to it and say, okay, you get 3 votes each. Which one is it you're interested in working in? And soon your decision's been made without you having to stress too much. So that's everything. Thanks for listening in. Again, I was just thinking that we mentioned a lot about, it's important to get these things done yourself, but we understand that also nobody's going to question your processes better than someone coming from the outside. We've definitely learned that a lot in Circle Interactive from onboarding new people. And as people join in, you kind of start to kind of question, oh, why is it you do that? And, oh, I didn't know you did that. And they start to actually kind of think, oh, okay, yeah, I didn't really think about it like that. So once you get to that point of, having that conversation, it's really good to get someone to come in and say, oh, I think I don't quite understand why you're doing this. Can you explain it more? And that, that's still a valid thing to think about. But I think essentially we found that if you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it well enough. And that's pretty much the key to where we're going. So thank you, everyone. And cheers, Bruno.